This is Wyoming. 600,000 people call it home. America's least populated state and its 10th largest, spanning 97,914 square miles, bigger than the entire United Kingdom. That's just 6 people per square mile, 2.3 per square kilometer, making it even emptier than Alaska. But why? Was it by accident or by design? Nearly half of Wyoming, 48% to be exact, is owned by the federal government. Not companies, not citizens, the government. Surprised? Most people are. But this is just the beginning of Wyoming's hidden story. We're told America is a country of growth and expansion, of spreading west, of taming the wild lands. So how did Wyoming, a state bigger than 39 other states, end up with fewer people than a mid-sized city? What if powerful forces have been working to keep Wyoming empty from the very beginning? That the land, the climate, and even the government itself created America's largest experiment in controlled emptiness. From the moment Wyoming became a territory in 1868, it was fighting an uphill battle, literally. At an average height of 6,700 feet above sea level, Wyoming is the second highest state in America. But why does that matter? Because the higher you go, the harder it is to grow anything. When settlers arrived, they didn't find the rich farmland of Nebraska or Iowa. They found this. Rocky, windy, dry, and incredibly hard to farm. The soil in Wyoming has too much alkaline, making normal farming nearly impossible. Even today, less than 10% of Wyoming's land is used for crops. And it gets worse. Wyoming's growing season is as short as 80 days in some areas. For comparison, Iowa farmers get almost twice that time. When you have less than 3 months to grow crops before frost kills everything, you're not going to succeed. But there was something else, something few history books mention: the railroads. When the Transcontinental Railroad was built, the Union Pacific Railroad was given every other square mile of land on both sides of the tracks, stretching 20 miles in each direction. The result? A checkerboard pattern of ownership that made large-scale settlement nearly impossible. Historian John Wagoner from the University of Wyoming stated, "The checkerboard pattern created by railroad land grants was deliberately designed to prevent any single group from controlling long stretches of land. It basically locked much of Wyoming into a pattern that kept population growth low." Why would the government create such a system? Well, it was because the railroads needed to make money. By controlling half the land along their routes, they could ensure profits from shipping, timber, and minerals. But what about people settling in the land? That was less important. And then there was the Homestead Act of 1862, which promised 160 acres to anyone who could farm it for 5 years. In states like Kansas and Nebraska, 160 acres could support a family. But in Wyoming, it was a recipe for disaster. About 61% of Wyoming homesteads failed. Think about that. More than half of the people who tried to make a life here couldn't. The land simply wouldn't cooperate. In 1878, John Wesley Powell published his report on the lands of the arid region of the United States. In it, he warned Congress that lands west of the 100th meridian, including Wyoming, were too dry for normal farming. He calculated that homesteads should be at least 2,560 acres, 16 times larger than what the government was offering. Congress ignored his recommendations. But if the land was so difficult, why did Wyoming become a state at all? The answer? Politics. In 1890, Wyoming became a state with just 62,555 people, the smallest population of any state ever admitted to the Union. It was less about thriving settlements and more about political strategy. Leaders in Washington were eager to solidify control over the West and boost their representation in Congress. And for Wyoming, statehood meant more authority over its land and resources. Even today, Wyoming remains the only state that has never reached 1 million people. But while politics may have granted Wyoming statehood, it couldn't change the reality of the land itself. The land was fighting against settlement, and if that wasn't enough, Mother Nature was preparing an even harsher welcome, because Wyoming's climate isn't just challenging, it's downright hostile. If you've never felt Wyoming's wind, you can't truly understand it. This isn't just a gentle breeze we're talking about. Wyoming has some of the strongest winds in America. For instance, the average wind speed in Casper is 12.9 miles per hour every day of the year. For comparison, Chicago, the Windy City, averages just 10.3 miles per hour. The winds near Laramie and Cheyenne regularly hit hurricane force. Interstate 80 between these cities closes due to high winds, an average of 12 days every winter. Not snow, wind. Meteorologist Dave Lipson from the National Weather Service stated once, "Wyoming sits where several major air patterns meet. Combined with the state's mountain landscape, this creates some of the most consistent strong winds anywhere in the lower 48 states." And then there's winter. Parts of Wyoming average over 200 inches of snow per year, with temperatures in Yellowstone dropping as low as minus 66 degrees Fahrenheit. But it's not just the cold, it's the relentless combination of snow, wind, and ice that turns Wyoming into a hostile, isolated landscape for months on end. Most states experience winter for a season. Wyoming experiences it as a full-time job. In fact, Wyoming has been named the worst state for winter driving, with residents facing a 1.5 chance per 100,000 people of being in a snow-related accident. Winter storms, blizzards, and extreme cold temperatures aren't just inconvenient, they're downright dangerous. The winter of 2022 to 2023 was particularly brutal, setting record-breaking snowfall across many areas, devastating livestock and wildlife, and cutting off communities for weeks. Winter here isn't just cold, it's isolating, it's dangerous, it can kill you. But how do people survive here? The answer is simple. They adapted, but not by building cities. Ranching became the only viable way of life for many Wyoming residents, but successful ranching here requires thousands of acres, meaning people lived miles apart from their nearest neighbors. The average cattle ranch in Wyoming spans 2,500 acres, where your nearest neighbor lives miles away. You're not building crowded communities. This wasn't a coincidence. This was by design. The harsh climate created a natural barrier to population growth, but nature wasn't the only force keeping Wyoming empty. Human decisions would reinforce this pattern of isolation for generations. Look at any map of major US highways. Notice something missing? Wyoming has fewer interstate highway miles than any other western state. Just two major interstates cross it, I-80 running east-west and I-25 running north-south. That's it. Is that because there's nowhere to go, or because someone doesn't want you to go there? Even today, there are no direct interstate connections between Wyoming's northwest region, home to Yellowstone and Grand Teton National Parks, and the rest of the state. For example, if you want to drive from Cheyenne to Jackson on an interstate, you can't. Then there's water, which is essential for Western development. Wyoming sits at the headwaters of 4 major river systems. Yet, despite controlling these crucial water sources, Wyoming has built fewer dams and reservoirs than neighboring states. Without water projects, towns stay small and farms stay scarce. Meanwhile, what Wyoming does have are industries that take resources from the land: oil, coal, natural gas, and mining. Industries that need land, not people. Wyoming produces 40% of America's coal and ranks 8th in natural gas and crude oil production. Former Wyoming Governor Mike Sullivan: Wyoming's economy has always been based on what we can take from the land: minerals, oil, gas. These industries need access to resources, not population centers. These industries employ relatively few people compared to the wealth they create. Wyoming ranks 4th in the nation for GDP per person, despite having the smallest population. Money flows through Wyoming, but people don't stay. These industries create boom towns that vanish when the resources run out. The landscape is full of ghost towns, once thriving mining communities, now reduced to tourist attractions. But here's where it gets really interesting. The state itself doesn't encourage growth. Wyoming has no state income tax. Sounds great, right? But this means fewer public services, which discourages people from moving there. The state government relies almost entirely on taxes from mining and drilling, taxing what comes out of the ground rather than what people earn. This creates a backward incentive. Wyoming's government benefits more from a new oil well than from a new family moving in. Since 2015, Wyoming has been one of only 3 states that has lost population, even as the national population grew by 4.1%. Limited infrastructure, almost no public transportation, and schools sometimes hours away from homes. For instance, in Meeteetse, Wyoming, high school students can travel up to 40 miles each way to school. This isn't neglect, it's a choice that has kept Wyoming empty for 150 years. But here's the most surprising part of Wyoming's story. The people who actually live there wouldn't have it any other way. But what do the people who live in Wyoming think about it? Well, they love it. They fiercely defend their way of life. They treasure the emptiness that most Americans would find unbearable. As a Wyoming resident put it, I can see for 50 miles in any direction from my home. You can't put a price on that kind of freedom. Wyoming has one of the lowest crime rates in America. In 2020, it ranked 5th lowest in violent crime nationwide. The murder rate is less than half the national average. When your nearest neighbor is miles away, crime becomes much harder to commit and much easier to spot. Another benefit of designed emptiness. Is it because there's nowhere to run after committing a crime? Is it because neighbors look out for each other? Or is it because Wyoming's emptiness attracts people who value independence and personal responsibility? Meanwhile, Yellowstone National Park sees over 4 million visitors annually. The Grand Tetons, another 3 million. That's 7 million people visiting a state where only 600,000 people actually live. More than 11 times the state's population visits just 2 of its attractions each year. They come, they marvel at the emptiness, and then they leave. They return to their crowded cities carrying photos of Wyoming's vast spaces, showing friends glimpses of freedom they experienced but didn't embrace. But why? Well, because living in Wyoming requires sacrifices most Americans aren't willing to make. Sacrifices of convenience, entertainment, shopping, and easy access to services. This is because Wyoming wasn't built for them. It was built for the few who understand what Forever West really means. It's not just a slogan, but a way of life where independence matters more than convenience, where self-reliance isn't just valued, it's required. And this brings us to the ultimate truth about America's emptiest state. Wyoming isn't empty by accident. It's empty by design. A mix of geography, climate, land ownership, and deliberate choices has kept it that way for over 150 years. The federal government controls half the state. The land itself fights against farming. The climate punishes those unprepared for its harshness. The roads and utilities are minimal. The economy focuses on resources rather than people. In a world where every inch of land seems destined for development, Wyoming stands as a reminder that some places were never meant to be conquered. They were meant to remain wild. Perhaps Wyoming's greatest value isn't as a place for millions to live, but as America's last great open space, a living museum of what much of our country looked like before we changed it. So now I ask you, would you live in a place like this, or is it better left untouched? The answer might tell you more about yourself than it does about Wyoming. Thanks for taking the time to watch. If you enjoyed our video, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more true geo stories from all around the world. Until next time. YouTube thinks you'll like this video, Why This Free Land Stays Empty. So, click it.